Winston Chesterfield is the founder of Barton, a strategic consulting firm at the heart of the luxury and wealth sector. With a background spanning wealth intelligence, luxury research, and advisory roles for some of the world's most prestigious brands, Winston brings deep insight into the psychology, behaviours, and values of this segment of the industry. His expertise covers travel, automobiles, real estate, private aviation, yachting, and more. Winston is known for his nuanced understanding of what makes luxury meaningful, timeless, and truly valuable in a rapidly changing world. Winston, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you very much, Fred. Nice to be here.
It's a real pleasure to be with you. We've obviously got to work on a few projects together. We occupy I'd say Matterform and Barton occupy quite complementary bits of the project ecosystem. Yourself in insights and research, ourselves in brand development, digital innovation and customer experience. But for those listening, can you let us know what Barton does?
Yeah, so Barton is a business that focuses entirely on one segment, which is the plus consumer. So what we mean by the plus consumer is the consumer with higher income and high levels of net worth to deliver understanding and insights on that group of people for brands who are focused on that group of people as an ideal customer. It's more than just, research and just providing access, for example. We don't just give people to say, here's an interview with someone wealthy. A lot of this is about an understanding of different groups of people in different stages of development of their wealth and their income. For example, a person who is a Henry, a high earner, not rich yet, who works in a city job in London, earns hundreds of thousands a year, and maybe actually a fantastic client for many, for example, car brands, versus someone who is 65 years old, net worth of $3 million, looks like they could be a good customer for a car brand, but actually not really spending hundreds of thousands anymore on motor cars and is at the end of their earning cycle. And so is actually looking a lot more to other things such as investment, maybe in things like real estate and potentially in passing down their wealth to the next generation. So what we try and bring is not just the access to actually be able to speak to these people directly, but the context of those people and the wealth and how they created it.
I want to get into the user cases for why brands need to pay for research in terms of insights. I think you've hinted at a lot of the stuff there, but what you're really saying is it's quite complex, and you'd think it might be simpler in luxury to understand the consumer, the customer, but it's not necessarily the case. Before we go there, can you just explain how you got into luxury? How did you come to found Barton personally?
I worked for two companies before setting up Barton. Immediately before Barton, really, I was working for a company called WealthX.
Yeah.
And WealthX is, at the same time as a sort of insights company, it's a data intelligence company that has a very comprehensive range of data on the world's wealthiest people. And that's all the way from high net worth people through very high net worth, all the way to ultra high net worth people. So people worth $1 million to $5 million, people worth $5 million to $30 million, and people worth $30 million and more. And their data set was created manually to begin with.
Yeah.
So it was compiled by human beings, and these were profiles of some of the most important wealthy people around the world. And the interesting thing about that business was that they didn't really have a sort of what you'd call a consulting division or a research division or anything of that kind. They had people producing profiles, but they didn't have a sort of special projects area. Mm-hmm. And so they actually bought this company that I was already working for called Ledbury Research. And Ledbury was specifically a research consulting firm. And it was a combination of, secondary desk and data research and primary research. And they provided services to jewelry brands, to car brands, to private banks and wealth managers as well. And they delivered insight that many big research firms simply could not fulfill. Could not fulfill for two reasons. Firstly, access.
Yep.
We were able to, building out a network at Ledbury and later in WealthX as well as a network for the business, build out a network of people who were much more of a target for, let's say, a jewelry brand or a watch brand. So their net worths were significant. They could prove they had a collection of cars or a collection of watches to us. And they weren't people who were within the wider networks, for example, of big research companies. Historically, a lot of research companies, up until that point of Ledbury, had seen the top tier of wealth in terms of research would be something like £100,000 household income and above. And that would be considered one homogenous group of people.
Yeah.
So if you take a segment and say, well, that was the wealthy group and it's 100,000 plus, for many projects I've seen, that was taken to represent everyone from people who actually had 100,000 income all the way through to people who had 10 million in income. And that is partly it's because a relatively small group of people in the world actually have huge net worth or very, very high income. But the reality is we know that someone who has an income of 10 million a year lives a very, very different life to someone who has 100,000 a year.
Yes.
And so the gulf is so massive that, really Ledbury came about with an idea that we actually have to represent this group not as one block of people, but of many blocks of different types of people and different needs and different expectations. That's where Ledbury started. It became WealthX Custom Research after WealthX acquired the business. And when WealthX was sold, it was sold to an organization that didn't really need a custom research division.
Got you.
And I had known all along that there was always going to be a need for a specialist business that focused entirely just on a very elite group of people in terms of their income, in terms of their wealth. Because despite the fact that for many big organizations, it was enough just to have this sort of one top tier. For the specialist organizations, the luxury brands, particularly the higher end luxury brands that, selling, very high end watches or selling jewelry or selling very high end luxury goods, or they were hotel brands that were, talking £1,000 a night plus for their rooms. They're not really interested in people who are, what you'd call in the mass affluent tier at all. They're only interested in the very high income and the high net worth group. And so there was a bit of a gap there, I think, always. And I know that there are many organizations that claim we can provide access to, we can represent these groups of people. I think they are economically enormously powerful. Some people say they have a disproportionate power as consumers, the high net worth consumer.
Yeah.
They control a disproportionate amount of wealth is what people say, particularly at the top tier of the ultra high net worth.
Which is hard to argue against.
It's hard to argue against because if you look at pure numbers, it is disproportionate.
Yeah.
But obviously some people's perspective on that is that they shouldn't control it and they shouldn't have that much wealth and the rest of it. But because of that, they are an economic force. And I think it is important to look at them separately and distinctly rather than simply as one segment of an overall consumer.
Yeah. And still just on the process of how you go about your work, with my superficial knowledge of this industry. But I mean, obviously when you're talking about mass market research, there's that thing, statistical significance, the critical mass of data that you need to spot a trend. You can be subject to outliers. Is there a risk that if you're only speaking in a project to say 5, 10, 15, 20 people, that you get statistically irrelevant stuff? You might get an accidental bias or something that's just a bit random. Is that a feature of what you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because sometimes clients only have a budget to do 5 or 6 interviews.
Yeah.
And what we always have to do very clearly up front is state that it can only really be indicative as findings. It can't be representative of the consumer group in that market as a whole. We have minimum standards when it comes to presenting the research results. So if a client says we can only afford to do 30 surveys per market, we will always say that is not significant enough a sample base for it to be representative of that market, just so you know. When we present these results to you, we'll always caveat them all the time like that. We have to do that because it'd be dangerous for us to say, no, it's fine, it's 30 people, it's enough, it's representative. And then later on, they do something and then they realize they were led too much by the research.
Yeah.
I feel like research, going back to the original question about how this is valuable for businesses, research and insight into this group of people is very, very useful, and it should be used by lots of companies, and lots of companies are smart enough to do it, to lay the groundwork, to sort of excavate and understand the market, understand the sector. One great example is private equity houses, very smart guys who, before they buy a company, they will ask research companies like Barton to conduct studies, to go out there and, as I said, excavate, understand who is the consumer of this product. We've been given a pitch book that says this product and this brand could be worth X by year Y. We want to check that hypothesis. We want to kick the tires. And so the ones that know what they're doing, they'll instruct a research company to do to investigate what they don't really know very much about. They can ask ChatGPT and they can do some Google searching themselves and get a rough idea. But it's speaking directly to a consumer, using a company that is especially motivated and focused on this sector is a different thing. It provides you a different perspective. And I think that, what we try and do, there's our sort of tagline is knowledge, perspective, passion.
Yeah.
And the middle one of those is the most important thing. Because I think what we're trying to do at Barton is simply, it's a perspective. It's not the answer. It is evidence. It is understanding. It is insight. But it is a perspective that many businesses say this has been extremely helpful for development of X, or it's helped us to internally develop this, and all of that is really great. What I get really worried about is businesses that do 5 or 10 interviews with us and want to use purely that as the answer for whatever they're going to do. And I think everyone would agree that's quite dangerous to do.
So you're giving a canvas and a opinion, but you're not being prescriptive.
Yeah.
You're giving the backdrop and the context and the sort of where the needle's going.
Yes.
Without being too prescriptive.
Too prescriptive.
Yeah.
Personally, obviously, I'm asked with my history and the rest of it to be a day consultant on jobs.
Yeah.
And so I've been day consultant. Barton does these kind of things. We can provide day consultancy as well. We don't just do we only purely provide big projects and research and insight. If someone says, look, we just want 3 days of your time to come and check something out and give us an opinion, we'll do that. Obviously, those contracts are heavily caveated by the fact that we are employed to give you an opinion here, and we are going to give you an opinion. But there is no evidence, no insight that has backed any of this up that you have paid for.
Apart from your accumulated wisdom over many years.
Yeah. And to be fair, those are perfectly legitimate scenarios. People actually get quite good value for money because they can just get 3 days of someone's time that they can afford, rather than spending 40,000-50,000 on a big research project with qual and quant, the rest of it. They might at the end of that go, well, we already knew most of this stuff, so this is not a good use of our resources.
Yeah.
But it's always a risk to just say, let's just get someone in to tell us what to do. And I think our work, as well as providing a perspective, though, as I said, the other thing was not one of the other words was knowledge, that's what the research bolt does, essentially with Barton. The perspective is our accumulated knowledge and understanding from years and years of doing all this stuff. But the knowledge is the bit that's fresh.
And I suppose you gave one example, which I think is probably quite understandable. So a private equity company investing in a company. So that might be a company that's already doing very, very well, but it might be doing well to, say, the older segment of the high net worth. They might want to know, how's that product or that service going to appeal to the younger people coming up, or vice versa. They might be doing very badly at the moment, but there might be an upside to some trends coming from the younger generation. That's understandable. Are there any other user cases of your research and how you getting involved? Can you demonstrate how it changes the outcome for the client?
Yeah. So
were they not to use you or use your service?
Yeah, I think so. What we try and bring is an understanding of the huge range of particularly luxury consumers there are in the world.
Yeah.
But focus very much on those who can actually afford it. I mean, there are genuinely luxury consumers out there who we would say are not really the intended target for luxury brands, but they are still luxury consumers, and that's perfectly fine. They either take it out on credit or they save up for it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly fine. They are not, though, who the brands themselves deem as the actual target for these kind of products or services. What we do is try and, I suppose, educate and show brands that and businesses that the variety of consumers there are amongst that target group of people who can afford luxury is vast, not just in terms of needs bases, but in terms of their circumstances and their behavior. And often some clients who haven't done a huge amount of research and insight work before will come and say, we think we just need to speak to people who 1 million plus, that's it. And there's been no other specification, there's been no other, as you talked about, no other thinking about future client mapping. So where are your future customers going to come from? What do they look like? What markets are they in? How old are they currently now? What are they interested in now and what are they going to be interested in the future? That's not to criticize these organizations, because they're clearly, they've got their client base. They don't have a huge visibility on the rest of their client base except what they consume, so what they buy from that business and brand. Mm-hmm. And maybe a little bit about, the products they're using or the services they're using, but not really much else. Brands don't actually have a huge visibility on people beyond their interaction with the brand. And because of regulation, particularly these days, that has meant that they can't even keep that information for very long because of GDPR and things like that. So I think what we try and do is we try and provide the other side of the moon kind of insight on these people. And that might be, we notice you said these two markets are the markets you're interested in doing the study on. But what we know is that this group of people over here in this market, in the last 2 or 3 years, have become extremely important for many other businesses in this sector. Have you not thought about trying to understand what your brand identity or brand value or the need states of these individuals were and how that might apply to your business going forward?
And I suppose, as ever, it's the action from the insight that provides the value. What's an example of an action a hotel brand or a automotive brand or a property brand in luxury might take, having commissioned you, compared to what they would have done before?
Yeah, I think it's essentially in uncovering value that they hadn't yet considered, which is the general way of putting it. And I think there's many instances of that. It's target audiences they hadn't really bothered about before. So certain age groups of people, they thought, well, they're not really relevant for us.
So it might end up in new marketing activities, new marketing demographics, new partnerships, surprising things that would have surprised them a year ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's because you don't know what you don't know. And it's these organizations are very well run. They're very sophisticated people. They're very good at what they do. But again, because you don't know what you don't know, you might be thinking, these are our valuable clients, and we think we need to get more of these clients. It's a natural thing to think.
And because naturally any luxury organization leans so heavily into exceptional customer experience or product design or whatever it is, you can actually end up not knowing your future customer because you're so siloed into who you've been serving for the last 10 years, 50 years, 100 years.
Precisely.
You can get the blinkers on, I suppose.
Precisely. And if you are a good brand, you are focused on the craft. You are focused on, if this is a product, you're focused on the craft, the craftsmanship, the material. You're focused on telling the story of the heritage and timelessness to your consumer.
Yeah.
And you're hoping that resonates with the consumer that currently is interacting with you. And all you can think is, I want more of those consumers. I need more of those to buy more of it because they are engaged with what I'm selling.
And the path of least resistance.
Yeah, it's a path of least resistance as well.
So what do you say to people, we've said this a few times on this podcast, but to the Henry Ford quote, if you ask your customers what they want, you build a faster horse. There is a certain amount of gut and instinct and creative boldness that happens in luxury that research and insights would never tell you.
Yeah.
What do you say to that argument?
I largely agree with that argument. I'll explain it. There's a caveat though. I agree with it because I think if they'd asked everyone, they would have invented the iPhone. It would never would have happened.
Yeah.
I don't think that would have been created. I know there's a segment about Steve Jobs being interviewed about the iPod's numbers and then they ask him about a potential iPhone just jokingly, and obviously later on they can actually come out with an iPhone. But I think it's a bit like also SpaceX didn't go around and say, is everyone wanting to have
space travel is your leisure pursuit.
Space travel, let's just see how big this market is, because I guaranteed if you actually did focus groups and surveys on it, it would actually be very, very small, the number of people that be willing to go into space. And also, at least at the current point in time, and actually the amount of money that you have to pay, there'd be very, very few people able to do it. And if you were purely a bank, you'd say, well, and you're funding all these ventures, just say there's no point. It's ludicrous. It's a waste of money. You're never going to get enough people to do it. But then without that kind of risk taking, you never have enough progress.
Yeah.
And so I think that if you purely kept to what research tells you to do, what the consumer research tells you to do, it's not only boring, it's also you lack innovation. You lose innovation. And I think the other thing about it as well is, and this is not to disparage, the ordinary consumer or even the high net worth consumer, the high income consumer. A lot of people don't have a huge amount of imagination. I find in the research we do, we have to provide a lot of prompts to people to get them to think about a certain way of thinking. Not everyone thinks with the mind of Da Vinci or with the mind of Van Gogh. They don't have that kind of imagination. They have what is a normal imagination, which is usually quite limited. So when you're asking people to ideate and say, what do you think, could be the next level in this? How would you create the perfect car, or what would you do regarding, design of this piece of jewelry? How would you change it? And even though people have been critical of the current situation or the proposed designs put in front of them, they have almost no idea how to actually recommend any change, specifically anything themselves. And that's fine, because what they're doing is they're paying you as a luxury brand to be that creative, to be that intelligent, to be that clever. And that's kind of the deal. The deal is you pay a higher margin for beauty and creativity of a luxury brand.
Yeah.
And you pay a lot of money for it. It's a bit like you pay, a brilliant portraitist a lot of money because they're a brilliant portraitist. You couldn't do it yourself. You can criticize it when he finishes it and you say, that's not good enough, I don't like it, it's not my taste. But it's still something that only a good portraitist is able to do. Where I disagree with purely going gunslinging around and trying everything you possibly can as a business is that, number one, you'll burn through so much money just R&Ding absolutely everything under the sun.
Yes.
Just experimenting with everything under the sun. So practically it won't work for your business. You'll burn through every single successful pile of cash you've ever made. The other thing is you also risk your brand. There is a huge amount of risk to your brand in making too many mistakes, too many errors. I've seen, for example, a lot of brands in luxury, a lot of partnerships, collaborations, some of which just go way too far, and they come across as quite desperate. Mm-hmm. And it's obviously experimentation. It's trying. And some of it has been backed up by the fact that these collaborations and these drops, they're so popular and people buy them, and that builds us up in people's eyes and we make money off of them, the rest of it. But when you actually speak to some consumers are already saying, like, I think all this stuff they're doing is too much. Now I think they should start to rein all this stuff in. But the brands still keep doing it and not realizing that all this time they could have just asked, a decent number of their consumers and saying, what do you think about all this?
Because, dare I say it, the strategy is at the whim of a very strong-minded creative director who's in the hot seat for that 5-year period. And it's sort of an externalization of their desires rather than necessarily what's going on in the market.
Exactly.
It's the counter side of the gut and the instinct.
Exactly.
Argument.
And probably also shareholder-led as well. Particularly if it's financially successful to do the previous collaborations, it's worked from that revenue point of view. All you're asking basically is them to say, yeah, go ahead, try it again. Let's see if we can make even more money. Yeah. And I think that, there is, so one of the ways in which I think I was thinking about the relationship between the consumer and the brand. If you think about tailoring or you think about haute couture, there was naturally a constant two-way communication. There's always a two-way communication between those two groups, those two people. And even though, like, some tailoring brands you wouldn't call they're not big brands, but they have reputations. And, there can be a point where some people can identify, a brand of a tailor or a couture maker by the cut of their clothing, or by the fact that they made for famous people. Back in the 1940s and 50s, there were many celebrities, and everyone knew who made their clothing. So Hardy Amy's made for a lot of famous celebrity society ladies, and people knew that their clothing was made by Hardy Amy's. So there was always a need for a relationship between those two, for the reason that it's a risk to him to have his clothing on the back of the wrong person.
Yes.
It's a risk to the person buying it, that they spend all the money they're spending and they don't look good. And then they haven't been, they have not been using the right couture makeup, but they don't look, they look a bit tatty, or they look a bit tacky, or they look a bit, out of kilter for their personality and their reputation. And I think that if we think about it, that was a natural feedback loop that no one has ever said there's anything wrong with.
Which, as you sort of industrialize the process or get big or multinational, and becomes lost in a sort of middle layer, I suppose, quite often.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think there are some really clever brands, and it could be anything from, there are some really clever car brands that I know that engage with some of their best customers on a regular basis and try and understand what they're thinking. They have these dinners, they have round tables where they're asking, what do you think of the models we've been developing recently, anyone got any comments, and the rest of it. Some brands are really, really good at that, and I think that is a sensible way to go about things. It's not to be so arrogant to think that anything you're doing, anything you're making is always perfect, is always fantastic. But it's also not being too insecure to be thinking we've got to ask the permission of our customers about every single thing we do.
Yes. Yeah. I wondered where you're in an amazing position, really. You have a sort of, you look across this industry and the trends and the insights that happen and change. You've got a real position there. From your experience, what are some of the big things over the last 10, 15 years that have changed in luxury? I mean, I've heard you say, meaning over the material or things like that. What's been happening in luxury overall that has most changed?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the biggest impacts has been you've had a huge new wealth population grow in the East Asian region in particular.
Yes.
And that has affected the way in which people see brands in luxury. Mm-hmm. Do they identify them anymore as brands that are suitable for them? Do they identify these brands as are they making things for the people in their segment anymore, in their country anymore? Or are they making these items for a group of people they have almost nothing in common with, except the fact that they're fellow human beings?
Yeah. I
think that has had a huge impact on, number one, the brand's interpretation of themselves and their mission. I think that it's also affected the old consumers, so the former consumers of those brands. And we can't forget that, it was only probably around 50 to 60 years ago that the vast majority of luxury was really consumed by Europe, Western Europe, North America, and a little bit of Japan. And that was it. Yep. And now luxury is a very global thing. And particularly if you think about East Asian countries, ex-Japan Asian countries, like obviously China is one of them, but there are many other countries where luxury is becoming more of a currency in itself. Latin America, even though it's development-wise in terms of its wealthy population, luxury identity is a huge thing in Latin America. It wasn't probably 60, 70 years ago a huge thing in Latin America. It was a very elite thing for a certain group of people. But these are huge populations of humans we're talking about, that because of things like the internet, about information around brands, who wears the brands, the history of the brands, the social meaning of wearing the brands, because of that, the audience for it has expanded massively.
Which I think, which goes back to sort of a practical explanation of where you're needed, is that, there might be consumers in Western Europe, or to a certain extent the US, who are terribly worried about, rightly so, about sustainability or, ethics and things like that. That might not be the case for that same brand in a different market, where they might be on a different path or a different kind of cultural context.
And we often do
you've got to split that.
And we often do find that is the case. We often do find that there are very measurable differences, very clear between markets on things which are about values, are about interpretation of a brand, the way in which your brand is seen. And this makes it much more complicated for the brands, because from their perspective, particularly if you take a French brand, a French luxury brand that's been around for, let's say, 150, 200 years.
Yeah.
And that brand says, we know how we're perceived. We're perceived like this. This is how everyone perceives us.
And you find their wine being diluted with Coke in another country. And you're like,
and then you find actually we're not perceived by this, but like this by this market. Because that's a relatively new market for us. And we didn't realize they actually saw us this way. And we didn't realize that the brand we thought, with the country that we thought interpreted us like this, has actually changed their point of view about us and actually now sees us like this.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the different markets you go to and the different understanding of how you're perceived and how people value you as a brand. It's also how frequently do you update that information? Because one of the things I definitely would say in addition is the last 10 years is the evolution of the way people think about certain brands is so rapid now.
Yes. Why is that?
I think it's because brands go quicker through cycles. Mm-hmm. The trend cycles we have are much faster. I think attention spans are dropping. And I think because attention spans are dropping overall, people get bored with output. When they get bored with output, the brand has to refresh. So I think that there's a lot more pressure to refresh, particularly in terms of product range, not in terms of brand identity and things like that, but in terms of product range, in terms of influencers and things like that. People feel they have to keep switching around because people are like, I'm done with that one at this point in time. And I think, one of the great examples of this, it's always been a tumultuous brand, but Gucci, as we know, is 1 minute Gucci's trendy, the next minute it's not. And you compare that tumultuous nature, particularly in the last sort of 5 years or so of Gucci, just 1 minute being hot, next minute being not, 1 minute being hot, next minute, crazy turmoil as a brand. And it's funny because luxury brands in many ways are actually meant to be kind of aloof from this kind of turmoil, aloof from too much trend. They're meant to be something that is just so cool and timeless and constantly desirable that the idea of something being hot or not when it's a genuine luxury, manufacturer doesn't make any sense to the the pre-1990 sort of mind. And I think that it's because of that, I think the rapid change in people's attitude towards brands means that their lifetime on the podium is just a lot shorter.
And again, I guess it changes. There's those at the more volume end of the spectrum, like drinks or whatever, where you can sort of satisfy any demand that comes more or less within reason, versus like the genuine scarcity brands that probably can be a bit more aloof or should be more aloof. Yeah. But again, it just points to the complexity in what you're dealing with.
Yeah. And I think that there are always lessons. I mean, people always use the example of Hermes, and I know people get bored of hearing about Hermes.
No, but it's a good one because people understand it.
But the thing that they did that was fundamental to their own survival as a brand, as well as a business, but mainly as a brand, was that they didn't listen to people who were trying to change their values. They didn't listen to consultants who were trying to tell them to make more money or tell them to, just understand the new realities of a different world. They're not interested in that. They were interested in maintaining standards which, were probably became out of fashion at certain points, but actually has maintained, a standard of the way in which they see themselves. And I think that fundamentally is something that I think lots of other brands have lost, is they don't tell enough consultants to go and boil their head. They don't reject shoddy information enough. They don't stand by their own values and standards. They are willing to make sometimes very big drastic changes. And I think one of the beautiful things about some lovely luxury brands is that despite the fact that they've evolved a bit, they still maintain a little bit of that slightly, I wouldn't say timeless, I'd say slightly old-fashioned, slightly out of touch, slightly past its time atmosphere. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I actually think that's quite charming. Yeah, it shows at least they've maintained, there's a human being there that stood and defended something, rather than it being something run by a committee or shareholders that have just decided everything on the basis of profit.
I mean, it's incredible when you talk about Bernard Arnault, obviously, who's the LVMH owner. it's not by accident that he's created that group and become, even in this age of sort of tech, plutocrats, he's still pretty much the world's richest man. It's not by accident he's created that group. It's very intentional.
Yeah.
Their strategy and what they've done.
It's intentional, and it's very careful. The carefulness, I think, is something that really you don't tend to get in the non-luxury world. You definitely do get it with them. I think one of the best things that they do is they always have a 30-year vision for any brand they buy. So they buy a brand, they don't think, unfortunately, the way in which very commercial buyers think about brands. Oh, so we're going to go it for the next 5 years. We've just got to think about making more profit the next 5 years, build up the value, then sell it.
And that's really interesting because, certainly from what we see, it's amazing how many Richemont and LVMH brands are in the short term complete dogs, but they can see it takes a lot of time, doesn't it, to get the value out of certain things.
It takes time. If they were owned by many private equity businesses that have been sold long years ago, passed along. But I think the organization, particularly LVMH, they have these 30-year visions. They buy things which they think are just timeless ideas.
Yes.
Timeless businesses. Now, fashion is a timeless business because people need to wear clothes. Travel, they bought Belmont. Travel is always going to be a timeless thing. Travel has been around as long as human beings have been on this earth. We were cavemen that moved from cave to cave.
But that's really interesting because Belmont's a great example. That is a 30-year play, whereas a Marriott acquisition, there's one today, would tend to be, they have to get value out of it in a 5-year period.
Yeah.
And it's a very different mindset. And I'm talking about the mass market there.
And I think that with the 30-year vision, you can be a lot more delicate. You can be a lot slower with change. Your evolution of that brand can look extremely natural. It can look unforced. It can look like it's just moving with the times gently rather than being thrown into a new phase, completely re-identified, and then losing all of your existing, patrons, and then having to go and find new ones. And not even pleasing those people because they've moved on to something else. Yeah. And so you scrap around with these very short windows of success, like 5-year windows when people talk about it. Inevitably, you end up scrapping around trying to find essentially revenue for those 5 years. And unless you can perform miracles most of the time that you can't, I always find it a little bit unsatisfying. I can imagine being unsatisfying as a brand proprietor, running a business where you're given such pressure within 5 years to increase revenues to X, to increase profitability to Y, and all at the same time completely reform and change the brand and expect those results in such short order. I do think that the vision that particularly LVMH shows towards its acquisitions and the patience that it has for those acquisitions is good. There have been some exceptions, obviously. With obviously, Off-White was an exception, but that was partly because, unfortunately, Virgil Abloh did. He was the founder, and he unfortunately died, and so that didn't make any sense anymore as an investment for LVMH. But the majority of cases, we're talking about a business that sees the long-term value because it sees timeless value in the acquisitions it makes. Yeah.
Just to move around a bit with some sort of shorter form questions. One thing I would love to ask, what are your favorite luxury brands, you personally?
Personally. From a business perspective or from
personal?
Personal perspective. Favorite? Well, I love Cartier.
Yeah.
Well, I mainly like Cartier because I have Cartier watches. And I've never really been a Rolex watchman. I've always been a Cartier watchman. The reason why I like Cartier is mainly design. It's a lot of the brands I like are very, very design focused. It's just I just happen to find the design extremely appealing. Now, like some people say, I like Cartier because of the heritage, because of the rest of it. Now, I actually say, some people say, well, that's just rubbish, that's just fluff, that's not an important part of it. It's more about what it fundamentally is offering, the materials and the design and the rest of it. And all the stories and maharajas is not important. I disagree. I think that even though it seems like it's fluff, the heritage that Cartier has as a jeweler, even though it's never really been a proper bona fide royal jeweler, creator of crown jewel pieces, it still served, some of the most elite people in history. And when it comes to things like, the long-term value of the pieces you buy from brands like that, it's good. If you want to sell them on, if you want to hand them down to your children, you're handing down something that has heritage and timelessness to it. The story that's behind it seems like fluff, but actually it is actually
I agree
quite important.
that the intangible imperception of value is actually very, very real, because if it's in all of our lives, like we value things differently. And that's the same for me, actually. The heritage for a brand, like Land Rover produced some of the worst built cars for many, many years, but still was one of the great car brands in my mind, because of what it stood for and what it meant.
I think because people often, I've actually had conversations with people about this, and I've heard people in interviews say, for example, to me, it doesn't really matter what story and everything's behind the brand. What fundamentally matters is what's the material they're using, how have they made it, and that's it. And that's fine, that's their perspective. But I feel like there's a little bit more to life, there's a little bit more to experience than purely what is tangibly touchable and real in that sense. I feel like the romance of the history of a brand that goes along with the product that you have is part of the experience of owning it and of using it.
Yeah.
And I think that people that know that, I think they can recognize it, and they'll probably nod along and agree that, yes, that is part of it. It is knowing that, great film stars had these pieces or had this brand. And when you have it, it's, people always think that that's all, that you're just boasting. You're connecting yourself with elite people, and you're trying to align yourself with that. So it's a kind of brag. I don't even think it's that. I think it's that you've bought into something. You've invested in an idea. You've invested in a company that has great history and has made for many great people. And so you feel that you're aligned with that. Being aligned with that is actually a romantic thing. And I think that life needs to have like intangible romanticism with it, because I think without it, everything being purely about physically what's in front of you, physically what's it made of. These aren't widgets. These are, items of luxury. So we have to treat them in that way.
I'd agree with that. Where another interesting thing is morality. Like, where do you feel luxury? Do you feel it's a force for good? There's a lot of arguments, obviously, against it. Over taking over too much of the world's wealth, overconsumption, lack of responsibility in some areas. What's your view on that? Do you feel you work in a worthwhile industry?
I do. I feel that luxury, when it's done right, it encourages craft and trade to be handed down from one generation to the next when it comes to luxury products. Yep. I think also that when people are paid properly, they can have good lives. If people work in the luxury industry, they can be paid properly, they have good lives. I think most of the time, if you're making luxury goods or providing luxury services, you're getting people with outsized resources, essentially, to pay for those goods and services because they enjoy them.
Yes.
As long as no one is being exploited, it's not doing a huge amount of harm. And in actual fact, what in many ways you're doing is you're opening up a world of experiences and wonder in a sense that you can't do with, let's say, washing machine powder. No one's opened up to a world of wonder by the washing machine powder industry.
Yeah.
The luxury industry helps you think beyond. It pushes your imagination as a consumer and as a producer. And I think in luxury has also been at the heart of innovations over the years. Some of the best luxury brands, as you know, at the heart of their brand, like Louis Vuitton, it was an innovation.
Yeah.
Lighter cases that can be taken on steamships and trains that are also waterproof. When you leave them standing in the rain, they don't sort of cave and sink in. All the expensive worth dresses inside get destroyed by the water that's seeping through the leather. So all of these, so there is innovation that comes from luxury. There is, and value in that. When you have poverty in the world, particularly, or when you have just generally inequality in a country, people consuming insane amounts of luxurious services and goods it feels, some people have a bad taste in their mouth about it. And sometimes you're a witness to things and see things and understand things which you think are excessive. I mean, I've heard stories about people using yachts, for example, and the amount of money they spend. Not just what they spend and what they consume, but what gets wasted. Yeah, a lot of the time in the things that I get most not upset about, but I'd say concerned about in luxury, and the way in which luxury is consumed is probably in the waste that happens. in, people being provided with a huge banquet on a boat and it just all being, thrown away.
Yeah.
Someone's prepared that, taken ages to prepare that. People just destroying things which have been made, beautiful things which have been made, but they're destroying it just for clout. On social media, they're sort of, shooting holes in something that's someone spent ages preparing.
I think that, but the converse is that luxury has an outsized sort of voice in the market, and they can also force change through their sort of halo position in the more responsible areas of sustainability or slow travel, slow food, whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's the other side of that, which has got an enormous force for good if it's used properly.
And I think many luxury companies do, because I think also if your customers, particularly take a travel company and you're going to a part of sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah.
And when you go there and people are like, wow, seeing some incredible people, but also seeing a real lack of clean water. I'm seeing lack of, proper schooling and housing, the rest. And you can think, I don't want to interfere in any of this. That's not really my place to do it. It's but then the luxury travel company has a foundation that means that you can go along and to sessions and actually help and speak to people, understand what their issues are. You can go and help with delivering, better water service, or you can make donations in that regard. I think these kind of businesses can actually open people's eyes up to things in the world which can be made better.
Yeah.
And remember also, beyond that kind of part of it, when it comes to particularly wealthy people who've created businesses, you're talking about successful people, and they can also, add value to people in those worlds as well. They can be quite clever and understanding. There might be for example, a charity that so they're not really sure how to make a certain impact, and one of the philanthropists is a wealthy guy, and he's changed lots of businesses, so he goes in and helps it out. And I think there is definitely positive change to be made with luxury. And I'm not on the side of people who think luxury shouldn't exist and say, luxury is essentially as a symbol of the inequality we have in our world and things like that. Because even though it is, I think that luxury is important for inspiration. It's to help people dream beyond the ordinary.
Yeah.
I think that if you speak to people who are struggling, and we have, heard on certain studies, we've heard from people who are aspiring luxury consumers about certain brands. And these are things that they dream of. They dream of one day owning, and they save up money for these items, and they just buy the perfume or something. But later on down the line, they want to be able to buy the handbag. Just getting rid of any kind of luxury in the world, getting rid of any kind of like beauty.
It's like getting rid of art.
It's like getting rid of art. It's like getting rid of beauty.
Some nihilists who would, but
Because what I think in the best expression of luxury is when it comes to products and also just experiences, is just someone expressing beauty in a certain way with a bit of leather or a bit of metal or with a hotel or a view or something like that. They're expressing a kind of beauty in a way, and you're able to buy it. And because of the level it's at, so many people want to buy it, so therefore it's going to be very, very expensive to do so. And I think forcibly ridding the world of that kind of level of beauty and saying no one can have it, it shouldn't be around for anyone, I just think is anti-human, and it's anti-progress.
Yeah. And then just quickly, two tech questions on technology. One, in terms of what you do, how does AI affect what you do and perhaps commoditize it? Second question is, where does luxury stand in this age of, automation, AI, the whole caboodle? Would you think luxury there's more of a premium on a kind of luxury service or product, or less?
Yeah, so I think the crucial element here is on both questions. I'll approach the first question first. It's slightly distinct. The ability of LLMs to replace
LLMs,
large language models.
Yeah.
Of artificial intelligence, large language models to replace basic functions that would have taken otherwise time for someone to complete or someone to do. Part of that is extremely useful. So it's like having an assistant.
Do you use it?
Yeah.
Paid version. Yeah.
So you use something like, if you have a meeting, you record the meeting, and AI on the phone produces an automatic transcript, and then you ask the AI to produce minutes from that meeting.
And you're more present in the interview. Yeah. It saves you time. Yeah.
So instead of you just writing shorthand and writing minutes, you're doing that. Now, obviously the consequences of that is at the moment, I'm obviously very happy with that because it's lower cost. And also it's not something that necessarily affects what my business does on a day-to-day basis. It just makes it more efficient and more streamlined. Now in future, will those LLMs be able to tell any brand at the drop of a hat, if they have a paid version of it, tell me what a 45-year-old in Omaha thinks of my brand, and as a result, recommend a path for me?
And that's the question.
And the question is, if the LLMs can become so advanced that they no longer need a company that goes out and does the research fresh, then obviously that's a huge danger. I still think there will always be a place for fresh insight and genuine interaction with human beings, understanding.
But also, when everyone has the same information, you still need to make a judgment call and interpret the same information. So
because if you were saying, let's say it's Grok 15, and you're asking Grok 15, tell me Grok, what this person in Omaha thinks, and Grok gives you a massive essay and it's brilliant and tells you what you should really do is consider these different things. Remember that your competitors are also able to use Grok 15, and they're probably getting exactly the same answer. And the risk, I think, with everyone using AI that I've noticed is homogeneity. Homogeneity in ideas, homogeneity in intelligence, homogeneity, I think, really in imagination.
Yeah.
And that's not the AI's fault, because the AI is trained, to pick up certain bits of information. I worry about human beings becoming very, very lazy. This is just a general point about AI. I've always thought that a lot of innovation has happened recently and continues to happen because laziness is something that increases, right? Laziness is something that, yes, it's always nice to know. Some people call it efficiency. So another term for laziness is efficiency. But take for example, so Amazon's perspective on their own product and service would be, well, we're making things more efficient. You can order something from your sofa and it be delivered to your door. How efficient is that? It is efficient. It's also innovating for laziness. Deliveroo is also innovating for laziness. AI is innovating for laziness.
Because you don't actually have to stop and think.
You don't have to stop and think. The amount of effort you put in on all of these things, you gradually think about all these things that are in our lives now, the actual effort you have to put in terms of mental effort, in terms of physical effort, is getting less and less and less. And we're infantilizing ourselves.
Which is a neat segue into the second question, because I would argue, to answer my own question, that the premium on luxury services or products, which are actually in a sense harder to consume or harder to experience, there's a bit more friction. They become more distinct in the age of mass distraction, automation, efficiency, and everything like that.
Yeah.
Do you agree? Or
I agree. I think what's going to happen is I think that we're careering towards, and I mean careering towards a world that is going to be a kind of saccharine type of perfection, which is things not feeling that real or authentic, but being very perfect.
Yeah, and then surprise, surprise, at the same time, there's a mental health crisis, and we've never been more unhappy, despite being more comfortable than ever.
Because AI will work out ways for us to be more equal without upsetting too many people. AI will eventually work out ways in which, roads could be done, improved more cheaply. We'll have self-driving cars. That means that traffic jams will probably, not vanish, but, certainly become less. Lots of things will incrementally improve, but I think it will feel fake. I think it will feel manufactured. I think one of the nice things about luxury is both in service delivery and in terms of luxury products, is the amount of humans involved.
Yes.
Humans are flawed people. Humans are flawed animals. Like, we are just flawed. And part of the flaw is, we don't always get the stitching right. We're flawed in a hospitality sense because we can say something really charming one minute and be a lovely host, and then, have to go off 1 minute and then have to come back and say sorry. Yeah. But part of that is the authenticity of the experience. I had a really great experience. I think some of the best experiences, it's easier for hospitality experiences to express proper luxury these days.
Yeah.
I think retail companies really struggle to express luxury because if you're ordering online, it's very hard to provide a proper end-to-end luxury experience anyway. Also, if you're going to store, how much time, what are your touch points with people in a store? It's 30 minutes to an hour, maybe. And particularly if you're having to put people into an iPad queue and the rest of it, you've already just disappointed people from the get-go.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in hospitality, if someone stays with you for a week in a luxury hotel, you've got lots and lots of opportunities throughout that week to surprise and delight and entertain them and make them feel like they're having a genuine luxury experience. And I was at a hotel in the Alps, and it was quite quiet. It was a skiing event, but there was relatively little snow, even though there was snow at the top, so it wasn't that busy in the hotel. So they were more able to provide that kind of experience. But a lot of what it was about was, it wasn't about the physical product was beautiful, so you get to that's a touch point you can enjoy and take part in. That wasn't really the fundamental reason why it was a genuine luxury experience. The staff, in terms of their professionalism and the rest of it, they were very good at providing that sort of luxury service, in delivering very well made drinks, in doing things quickly.
Yeah.
But the reality was the luxury bit was the warmth. It wasn't the service. It wasn't the stuff that a robot could do. It was the warmth that only a human being can deliver.
Yeah.
And that is where I think luxury will divide from lots of mass-produced services being robot delivered or AI derived. I think that luxury will be distinct, because I think when it comes to the experience of luxury, you need that human warmth in order for it to be a genuine luxury experience.
I completely agree, and it's why I remain so excited about this industry, because you can just see humans, the eternally uncommoditized nature of humanity, at the center of what we're about to go into always.
Yeah.
Rather than just be commoditized to the nth degree, which is a positive thing, I think, given some other stuff that's going on in the world.
Precisely, and I think that makes the luxury industry is lucky in that sense, in that it's still the master of its own destiny. I find other industries, maybe they're not the masters of their own destinies any longer. I think that they're, the human innovation that's there, the human beings that innovate inside of it, probably still have a role to play in the short run. But I do worry for, they always say, the people are always saying things like, "Oh, don't worry, you'll be able to do wonderful other things with your time. You won't have to do these menial little jobs." But we can't forget that at the current point in time, menial little jobs pay for mortgages and pay bills for energy and things like that in people's homes. And without those menial jobs being required, some other job has to be created.
It's also menial in inverted commas, because there is beauty in every kind of job as well. But I think we're lucky to sit where we are. We've come to the end of our time, but we always ask the same 4 questions on the way out, which I'm going to hit you with, if that's okay. The first one, and we've touched on a few of these themes, but what would you like to change most about your industry?
I would like there to be a bit more transparency in the luxury industry. I think regulation can help a lot more with this. I feel like there are big companies that can kind of, and they're sometimes good players, but they can pretty much do what they want and ride roughshod over smaller players.
Still.
Yeah, who have lower capital, they have lower, visibility and awareness amongst consumer base. But they could be much more genuine in terms of what they do as a luxury manufacturer. They can pay their staff properly. They can have beautiful products that they make in a proper way. And they can make it all entirely in one country and not use legal loopholes so that they can say made in Italy or made in France simply because 10% of the product is made in that market.
Yeah.
I feel like there is obfuscation in the luxury industry. I think it's intentional. I think you have to have a certain degree of mystique in luxury, otherwise it loses its charm. It can't be pure, it can't be entirely transparent. But I really feel that there's a lot of stories that are told, a lot of fluff is pushed out to cover things which aren't really happening.
I desperately want to ask you what you mean, because you probably got some user cases, but I'm not going to ask you.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Yeah, I wouldn't possibly name and shame, but I think those people that work in organizations that see that know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so sort of obfuscation of supply chain, and not saying like ethics, but the sort of the craft and the provenance and those sort of things can be glossed over a bit.
I think there are particularly smaller companies. It's quite unfair on smaller companies to do everything by the book in that industry. The bigger companies just take advantage of all of it, and they don't tell the truth to the consumer. And the consumer's got no idea that they think all this stuff is made in France and it's made in Vietnam or something, and they just and it's something that the industry and the insiders know. But the small guy is thinking, if only people knew all this stuff, they wouldn't buy any of it. But then they're buying it because they believe this. And I'm not a huge fan of over-regulating industries and businesses. I feel like that can always be a bit challenging when it comes to further innovation. But I do feel like there is a gap there between what luxury says it's doing and why it's doing it and what it's actually doing.
Yeah. Interesting. Next question. What concerns you most about the world we're leaving the next generation?
I think it's the digital.
Yeah.
I get really concerned by, even when talking to brands now about, the digital interface and the fact that everyone's online on their phone all the time. And you're giving them all these stats about it. And when they're saying, should we have print anymore? Should we just purely be a digital, marketing entity? And then you look at it and you say, well, based on the numbers, you should 100% be purely digital because people are spending more and more time just looking at a screen. Now, at the same time I see that and you advise that, it's actually extremely worrying because I feel that people are addicted in some degree to the chemicals that get released in their brain when their post gets liked, or they see a certain image, or they get a new post from a person they're looking out for a new post from on their new Instagram stories or a new TikTok. I think the endless scrolling, the endless viewing of things on phones is dangerous. And I see that in my generation. I'm sort of older millennial. And I know that some Generation X people are also very attached to their phones and their screens and their devices. Younger, even more so. I really hope that oftentimes what you have happen between generations is often the younger generation rejects what the previous generation did.
Like with the environment. You see that in a really positive way with our children's age.
Yeah.
You're seeing that. So I'd agree. I think there's hope there because the culture.
There's hope. That hopefully they see what my previous generation did was uncool, so I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, or destructive or harmful.
Yeah.
And it gets taught. And
I think it's something that I think has worsened even in the last year or so. I'd say it's visibly worsening.
It's so interesting. We've been doing this podcast about 3 or 4 years. And at the beginning, obviously, because it's the other great thing is the environment and things like that, or maybe people worry about war and all these things that are still live issues. But more and more people say this. And it's the last year. It's on everyone's minds. I'm sure we will all do something about it. Yeah. Because it's a real problem.
The thing with that is, so, I understand when people say there are conflicts in the world and those conflicts do need to end. But, conflicts are something that recurs and something that they recur and they sometimes resolve completely, but they usually have waxing, waning periods of time. And I think they also make us reflect. Big conflicts in big wars change the way humanity looks at each other, looks at, the way in which we deal with international relations, about the way in which we look at, countries being aggressive towards other countries and the rest of it. They change our perspective on things. And I think even the Second World War, that's still having an impact upon the way in which human beings and nations interact with each other. If you think about the way in which people think about whether we are, be diplomatic towards different nations, the rest of it, I think that has lasting impacts. The thing I think that's challenging about the digital is that there's not been another example of this in history. There's nothing to learn from. I was thinking about this the other day, thinking, is there any other kind of thing we've had where it's something we need information from? We use this as a crutch. We use it as an information portal. But it's become an addictive tool that is both useful but also bad for us at the same time. And it's difficult to think of another example of anything else we've learned from that's like that.
We could get into that. You could argue that industrialization was a positive, but there were many things that needed to be regulated in the wake of it, like pollution in inner cities and stuff. And you do have the negative externalities. So one just hopes that there's ways of reducing the harmful effects somehow.
Yeah.
But regulation, I mean, it's probably state interference is the only way to do it. But
yeah.
I feel we might get distracted by this.
No, and I think, and then recently there have been lots of calls in the UK, but also in European countries and America, in removing phones from schools. You know,
yeah, which is a given.
Yeah,
it has to happen.
Yeah. And so I think that again, regulation, you know, it's not something that everyone always wants to happen, but sometimes you need, you know, a benevolent organization to step in to actually instruct that this stuff that's happening can't continue to happen.
100%. Penultimate question: if you had to give up your job tomorrow, what would you do? I can see you being an atelier.
I would be very interested in trying to create something. I mean, one of the things I actually recently got into, I don't think I'd ever make a living out of it, but I recently got into portrait painting because John Singer Sargent's my favorite portrait artist, and I want to, you know, try and increasingly paint more like John Singer Sargent. It's very hard because he's, you know, one of the greatest portrait painters of all time.
Are you painting every week?
I'm painting every week, so it's something that you know, my grandfather was an artist, but he was a very, very talented artist. I'm not a talented artist, but I'm trying to learn the techniques, learn the rules. I'm trying to build, you know, paintings in the right way, understand, you know, that value creation you have in paintings and the colorings, you know, the different tones you use for skin, the rest of it. I like learning like new ways to do things, but the thing I love about it is that I like creative pursuits. I think I like things which people might look at my paintings and go, they're awful, or I don't know what you're wasting your time doing that for. But I find it soothing to actually paint and to create an image of a person that's not like a photograph. It's someone's hands have interpreted that in a way in which, and what you find as a painter is, as much as I try and be like John Singer Sargent, I have a style that unfortunately is something
very Winston Chesterfield
that I gravitate towards. That's your own style, and that's a nice realization, is that you don't always have to try and be like someone else. You can actually, when you're always trying to be like someone else, you're usually actually at all that time you're being yourself, and I think that's what is the thing I've noticed. Would I like to be you know, a luxury brand? Would I make things in luxury brands? Yeah, sure, I would.
Yeah.
I mean, my passion for what I did for a period of time, I started making pocket squares, and I designed a bunch of pocket squares. I had lots and lots of samples made. And then this is just before, you know, Barton and the rest of it, and also just before the pandemic. And obviously the pandemic came, and no one really was, the market for pocket squares seemed like it might be shrinking rather than growing. And I thought, maybe, you know, that was a good idea not to get too heavily into a high-end accessories market that is going to be niche at best. Because I was just passionate about, you know, different patterns and colors and the rest of it. And that probably would have been a start, but it's not something that I look at now and think, gosh, I really wish I'd done something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe in future I might do something, but I'm very happy in doing what I do at the moment. I like the diversity of helping a car brand 1 minute and helping a jewelry brand the next, and a travel business the day after that.
Brings me on to the last question. What's the most exciting thing for you over the next 5 years?
Seeing the business grow.
Yeah.
Seeing what happens in the next 5 years. It's going to be, hopefully there's going to be a lot of businesses looking to expand into new markets. There's going to be people introducing new products. There's going to be lots of fun and excitement. As I said, I love what I do, and I'm looking forward to the business growing in the next 5 years.
Winston, as ever, it's great to spend an hour in your company. Thanks very much for your time today.
You're welcome. Very nice to be here.
Pleasure.